Scotland is a country that is part of the United Kingdom. It contains nearly one-third of the United Kingdom's land area, consisting of the northern part of the island of Great Britain and more than 790 adjacent islands, principally in the archipelagos of the Hebrides and the Northern Isles. To the southeast, Scotland has its only land border, which is 96 miles long and shared with England. The country is surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean to the north and west, the North Sea to the northeast and east, and the Irish Sea to the south. The population in 2022 was 5,439,842 and accounts for 8% of the population of the UK. Edinburgh is the capital and Glasgow is the largest of the cities of Scotland. The Kingdom of Scotland emerged as an independent sovereign state in the 9th century. In 1603, James VI inherited the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Ireland, forming a personal union of the three kingdoms. On May 1, 1707, Scotland and England combined to create the new Kingdom of Great Britain, with the Parliament of Scotland subsumed into the Parliament of Great Britain. In 1999, a Scottish Parliament was re-established, and has devolved authority over many areas of domestic policy. The country has a distinct legal system, educational system, and religious history from the rest of the UK, which have all contributed to the continuation of Scottish culture and national identity. Scottish English and Scots are the most widely spoken languages in the country, existing on a dialect continuum with each other. Scottish Gaelic speakers can be found all over Scotland, however the language is largely spoken natively by communities within the Hebrides. The number of Gaelic speakers numbers less than 2% of the total population, though state-sponsored revitalization attempts have led to a growing community of second language speakers. The mainland of Scotland is broadly divided into three regions: the Highlands, a mountainous region in the north and northwest, the Lowlands, a flatter plain across the center of the country, and the southern uplands, a hilly region along the southern border. The Highlands are the most mountainous region of the British Isles and contain its highest peak, Ben Nevis, at 1,345 m. The region also contains many lakes, called lochs. The term is also applied to the many saltwater inlets along the country's deeply indented western coastline. The geography of the many islands is varied. Some, such as Mull and Skye, are noted for their mountainous terrain, while the likes of Tiree and Coll are much flatter. History. Prehistory. Prehistoric Scotland, before the arrival of the Roman Empire, was culturally divergent. Repeated glaciations, which covered the entire land mass of modern Scotland, destroyed any traces of human habitation that may have existed before the Mesolithic period. It is believed the first post-glacial groups of hunter-gatherers arrived in Scotland around 12,800 years ago, as the ice sheet retreated after the last glaciation. At the time, Scotland was covered in forests, had more bogland, and the main form of transport was by water. These settlers began building the first known permanent houses on Scottish soil around 9,500 years ago, and the first villages around 6,000 years ago. The well-preserved village of Skara on the mainland of Orkney dates from this period. Neolithic habitation, burial, and ritual sites are particularly common and well preserved in the Northern Isles and Western Isles, where a lack of trees led to most structures being built of local stone. Evidence of sophisticated pre-Christian belief systems is demonstrated by sites such as the Callanish stones on Lewis and the Moss How on Orkney, which were built in the 3rd millennium BC. Early history. Most of modern Scotland was not incorporated into the Roman Empire, and Roman control over parts of the area fluctuated over a rather short period. The first Roman incursion into Scotland was in 79 AD, when Agricola invaded Scotland, he defeated a Caledonian army at the Battle of Mons Graupius in 83 AD. After the Roman victory, Roman forts were briefly set along the Gask Ridge close to the Highland line, but by 3 years after the battle, the Roman armies had withdrawn to the southern uplands. Remains of Roman forts established in the 1st century have been found as far north as the Moray Firth. By the reign of the Roman Emperor Trajan, Roman control had lapsed to Britain south of a line between the River Tyne and the Solway Firth. Along this line, Trajan's successor Hadrian erected Hadrian's Wall in northern England, and the Limes Brighton Nicus became the northern border of the Roman Empire. The Roman influence on the southern part of the country was considerable, and they introduced Christianity to Scotland. The Antonine Wall was built from 142 at the order of Hadrian's successor Antoninus Pius, defending the Roman part of Scotland from the unadministered part of the island, north of a line between the Firth of Clyde and the Firth of Forth. The Roman invasion of Caledonia 208 to 210 was undertaken by emperors of the imperial Severan dynasty in response to the breaking of a treaty by the Caledonians in 197, but permanent conquest of the whole of Great Britain was forestalled by Roman forces becoming bogged down in punishing guerrilla warfare and the death of the senior emperor Septimius Severus at Eboracum after he was taken ill while on campaign. Although forts erected by the Roman army in the Severan campaign were placed near those established by Agricola and were clustered at the mouths of the glens in the highlands, the Caledonians were again in revolt in 210 to 211, and these were overrun. To the Roman historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio, the Scottish Highlands and the area north of the River Forth was called Caledonia. According to Cassius Dio, the inhabitants of Caledonia were the Caledonians and the Maiae. Other ancient authors used the adjective Caledonian to mean anywhere in northern or inland Britain, often mentioning the region's people and animals, its cold climate, its pearls, and a noteworthy region of wooded hills which the 2nd century AD Roman philosopher Ptolemy, in his Geography, described as being southwest of the Bowley Firth. The name Caledonia is echoed in the place names of Dunkeld, Roholian, and Schiholian. The Great Conspiracy constituted a seemingly coordinated invasion against Roman rule in Britain in the later 4th century, which included the participation of the Gaelic Scotai and the Caledonians, who were then known as Picts by the Romans. This was defeated by the Comes Theodosius, but Roman military government was withdrawn from the island altogether by the early 5th century, resulting in the Anglo-Saxon settlement of Britain and the immigration of the Saxons to southeastern Scotland and the rest of eastern Great Britain. Kingdom of Scotland. Beginning in the 6th century, the area that is now Scotland was divided into 3 areas: Pictland, a patchwork of small lordships in central Scotland, the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Northumbria, which had conquered southeastern Scotland, and Dalriada, which included territory in western Scotland and Northern Ireland, and spread Gaelic language and culture into Scotland. These societies were based on the family unit and had sharp divisions in wealth, although the vast majority were poor and worked full-time in subsistence agriculture. The Picts kept slaves mostly captured in war through the 9th century. Gaelic influence over Pict land and Northumbria was facilitated by the large number of Gaelic-speaking clerics working as missionaries. Operating in the 6th century on the island of Iona, Saint Columba was one of the earliest and best-known missionaries. The Vikings began to raid Scotland in the 8th century. Although the raiders sought slaves and luxury items, their main motivation was to acquire land. The oldest Norse settlements were in northwest Scotland, but they eventually conquered many areas along the coast. Old Norse entirely displaced Pictish in the Northern Isles. In the 9th century, the Norse threat allowed a Gael named Kenneth I to seize power over Pict land, establishing a royal dynasty to which the modern monarchs trace their lineage, and marking the beginning of the end of Pictish culture. The kingdom of Chenut and his descendants, called Alba, was Gaelic in character but existed on the same area as Pict land. By the end of the 10th century, the Pictish language went extinct as its speakers shifted to Gaelic. From a base in eastern Scotland north of the River Forth and south of the River Spey, the kingdom expanded first southwards, into the former Northumbrian lands, and northwards into Moray. Around the turn of the millennium, there was a centralization in agricultural lands and the first towns began to be established. In the 12th and 13th centuries, much of Scotland was under the control of a single ruler. Initially, Gaelic culture predominated, but immigrants from France, England, and Flanders steadily created a more diverse society, with the Gaelic language starting to be replaced by Scots, and a modern nation-state emerged from this. At the end of this period, war against England started the growth of a Scottish national consciousness. David I and his successors centralised royal power and united mainland Scotland, capturing regions such as Moray, Galloway, and Caithness, although he could not extend his power over the Hebrides, which had been ruled by various Scottish clans following the death of Somerled in 1164. In 1266, Scotland fought the short but consequential Scottish-Norwegian War, which saw the reclamation of the Hebrides after the strong defeat of King Haakon IV and his forces at the Battle of Largs. Up until that point, the Hebrides had been under Norwegian Viking control for roughly 400 years and had developed a distinctive Norse, Gaelic culture that saw many Old Norse loanwords enter the Scottish Gaelic spoken by islanders, and through successive generations the Norse would become almost completely assimilated into Gaelic culture and the Scottish clan system. After the conflict, Scotland had to affirm Norwegian sovereignty of the Northern Isles, but they were later integrated into Scotland in the 15th century. Scandinavian culture in the form of the Norn language survived for a lot longer than in the Hebrides, and would strongly influence the local Scots dialect on Shetland and Orkney. Later, a system of feudalism was consolidated, with both Anglo-Norman incomers and native Gaelic chieftains being granted land in exchange for serving the king. The relationship with England was complex during this period. Scottish kings tried several times, sometimes with success, to exploit English political turmoil, followed by the longest period of peace between Scotland and England in the medieval period, from 1217 to 1296. Wars of Scottish Independence. The death of Alexander III in March 1286 broke the succession line of Scotland's kings. Edward I of England arbitrated between various claimants for the Scottish crown. In return for surrendering Scotland's nominal independence, John Balliol was pronounced king in 1292. In 1294, Balliol and other Scottish lords refused Edward's demands to serve in his army against the French. Scotland and France sealed a treaty on October 23, 1295, known as the Auld Alliance. War ensued, and John was deposed by Edward, who took personal control of Scotland. Andrew Moray and William Wallace initially emerged as the principal leaders of the resistance to English rule in the Wars of Scottish Independence, until Robert the Bruce was crowned King of Scotland in 1306. Victory at the Battle of Bannockburn in 1314 proved the Scots had regained control of their kingdom. In 1320, the world's first documented Declaration of Independence, the Declaration of Arbroath, won the support of Pope John XXII, leading to the legal recognition of Scottish sovereignty by the English crown. A civil war between the Bruce dynasty and their long-term rivals of the House of Comyn and House of Balliol lasted until the middle of the 14th century. Although the Bruce faction was successful, David II's lack of an heir allowed his half-nephew Robert II, the Lord High Steward of Scotland, to come to the throne and establish the House of Stewart. The Stewarts ruled Scotland for the remainder of the Middle Ages. The country they ruled experienced greater prosperity from the end of the 14th century through the Scottish Renaissance to the Reformation, despite the effects of the Black Death in 1349 and increasing division between highlands and lowlands. Multiple truces reduced warfare on the southern border. Union of the Crowns. The Treaty of Perpetual Peace was signed in 1502 by James IV of Scotland and Henry VII of England. James married Henry's daughter, Margaret Tudor. James invaded England in support of France under the terms of the Auld Alliance and became the last monarch in Great Britain to die in battle, at Flodden in 1513. The war with England during the minority years of Mary, Queen of Scots between 1543 and 1551 is known as the Rough Wooing. In 1560, the Treaty of Edinburgh brought an end to the Siege of Leith and recognised the Protestant Elizabeth I as Queen of England. The Parliament of Scotland met and immediately adopted the Scots Confession, which signalled the Scottish Reformation's sharp break from papal authority and Roman Catholic teaching. The Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, was forced to abdicate in 1567. In 1603, James VI, King of Scots, inherited the thrones of the Kingdom of England and the Kingdom of Ireland in the Union of the Crowns, and moved to London. This was a personal union, as despite having the same monarch, the kingdoms retained their separate parliaments, laws, and other institutions. The first Union Jack was designed at James's behest, to be flown in addition to the St. Andrew's Cross on Scots vessels at sea. James VI and I intended to create a single kingdom of Great Britain, but was thwarted in his attempt to do so by the Parliament of England, which supported the wrecking proposal that a full legal union be sought instead, a proposal to which the Scots Parliament would not assent, causing the king to withdraw the plan. Except for a short period under the Protectorate, Scotland remained a separate state in the 17th century, but there was considerable conflict between the Crown and the Covenanters over the form of church government. The military was strengthened, allowing the imposition of royal authority on the Western Highland clans. The 1609 Statutes of Iona compelled the cultural integration of Hebridean clan leaders. In 1641 and again in 1643, the Parliament of Scotland unsuccessfully sought a union with England which was federative and not incorporating, in which Scotland would retain a separate parliament. The issue of union split the Parliament in 1648. After the execution of the Scottish king at Whitehall in 1649, amid the wars of the Three Kingdoms and its events in Scotland, Oliver Cromwell, the victorious Lord Protector, imposed the British Isles' first written constitution, the instrument of government, on Scotland in 1652 as part of the Republican Commonwealth of England, Scotland, and Ireland. The Protectorate Parliament was the first Westminster Parliament to include representatives nominally from Scotland. The monarchy of the House of Stuart was resumed with the Restoration in Scotland in 1660. The Parliament of Scotland sought a commercial union with England in 1664, the proposal was rejected in 1668. In 1670 the Parliament of England rejected a proposed political union with Scotland. English proposals along the same lines were abandoned in 1674 and in 1685. The Scots Parliament rejected proposals for a political union with England in 1689. Jacobitism, the political support for the exiled Catholic Stuart dynasty, remained a threat to the security of the British state under the Protestant House of Orange and the succeeding House of Hanover until the defeat of the Jacobite Rising of 1745. In 1698, the Company of Scotland attempted a project to secure a trading colony on the Isthmus of Panama. Almost every Scottish landowner who had money to spare is said to have invested in the Darien scheme. Treaty of Union. After another proposal from the English House of Lords was rejected in 1695, and a further Lords' motion was voted down in the House of Commons in 1700, the Parliament of Scotland again rejected union in 1702. The failure of the Darien scheme bankrupted the landowners who had invested, though not the burghs. Nevertheless, the nobles' bankruptcy, along with the threat of an English invasion, played a leading role in convincing the Scots elite to back a union with England. On July 22, 1706, the Treaty of Union was agreed between representatives of the Scots Parliament and the Parliament of England. The following year, twin Acts of Union were passed by both parliaments to create the United Kingdom of Great Britain with effect from May 1, 1707, with popular opposition and anti-union riots in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and elsewhere. The Union also created the Parliament of Great Britain, which succeeded both the Parliament of Scotland and the Parliament of England, which rejected proposals from the Parliament of Ireland that the Third Kingdom be incorporated in the Union. With trade tariffs with England abolished, trade blossomed, especially with colonial America. The clippers belonging to the Glasgow tobacco lords were the fastest ships on the route to Virginia. Until the American War of Independence in 1776, Glasgow was the world's premier tobacco port, dominating world trade. The disparity between the wealth of the merchant classes of the Scottish lowlands and the ancient clans of the Scottish Highlands grew, amplifying centuries of division. The deposed Jacobite Stuart claimants had remained popular in the Highlands and Northeast, particularly among non-Presbyterians, including Roman Catholics and Episcopalian Protestants. Two major Jacobite risings launched in 1715 and 1745 failed to remove the House of Hanover from the British throne. The threat of the Jacobite movement to the United Kingdom and its monarchs effectively ended at the Battle of Culloden, Great Britain's last pitched battle. In the Highlands, clan chiefs gradually started to think of themselves more as commercial landlords than leaders of their people. These social and economic changes included the first phase of the Highland clearances and, ultimately, the demise of clanship. Industrial Age and the Scottish Enlightenment. The Scottish Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution turned Scotland into an intellectual, commercial, and industrial powerhouse, so much so Voltaire said we look to Scotland for all our ideas of civilization. With the demise of Jacobitism and the advent of the Union, thousands of Scots, mainly lowlanders, took up numerous positions of power in politics, civil service, the army and navy, trade, economics, colonial enterprises and other areas across the nascent British Empire. Historian Neil Davidson notes after 1746 there was an entirely new level of participation by Scots in political life, particularly outside Scotland. Davidson also states far from being peripheral to the British economy, Scotland, or more precisely, the Lowlands, lay at its core. The Scottish Reform Act 1832 increased the number of Scottish MPs and widened the franchise to include more of the middle classes. From the mid-century, there were increasing calls for Home Rule for Scotland, and the post of Secretary of State for Scotland was revived. Towards the end of the century, Prime Ministers of Scottish descent included William Gladstone, and the Earl of Rosebery. In the late 19th century, the growing importance of the working classes was marked by Keir Hardie's success in the Mid-Lanarkshire by-election, 1888, leading to the foundation of the Scottish Labour Party, which was absorbed into the Independent Labour Party in 1895, with Hardie as its first leader. Glasgow became one of the largest cities in the world and known as the second city of the empire after London. After 1860, the Clydeside shipyards specialised in steamships made of iron, which rapidly replaced the wooden sailing vessels of both the merchant fleets and the battle fleets of the world. It became the world's preeminent shipbuilding center. The industrial developments, while they brought work and wealth, were so rapid that housing, town planning, and provision for public health did not keep pace with them, and for a time living conditions in some of the towns and cities were notoriously bad, with overcrowding, high infant mortality, and growing rates of tuberculosis. While the Scottish Enlightenment is traditionally considered to have concluded toward the end of the 18th century, disproportionately large Scottish contributions to British science and letters continued for another 50 years or more, thanks to such figures as the physicists James Clerk Maxwell and Lord Kelvin, and the engineers and inventors James Watt and William Murdoch, whose work was critical to the technological developments of the Industrial Revolution throughout Britain. In literature, the most successful figure of the mid-19th century was Walter Scott. His first prose work, Waverley in 1814, is often called the first historical novel. It launched a highly successful career that probably more than any other helped define and popularize Scottish cultural identity. In the late 19th century, a number of Scottish-born authors achieved international reputations, such as Robert Louis Stevenson, Arthur Conan Doyle, J. M. Barrie and George MacDonald. Scotland also played a major part in the development of art and architecture. The Glasgow School, which developed in the late 19th century, and flourished in the early 20th century, produced a distinctive blend of influences including the Celtic Revival, the arts and crafts movement, and Japanism, which found favor throughout the modern art world of continental Europe and helped define the Art Nouveau style. Proponents included architect and artist Charles Rennie Mackintosh. World Wars and Scotland Act 1998. Scotland played a major role in the British effort in the First World War. It especially provided manpower, ships, machinery, fish, and money. With a population of 4.8 million in 1911, Scotland sent over 500,000 men to the war, of whom over a quarter died in combat or from disease, and 150,000 were seriously wounded. Field Marshal Sir Douglas Haig was Britain's commander on the Western Front. The war saw the emergence of a radical movement called Red Clydeside, led by militant trades unionists. Formerly a liberal stronghold, the industrial districts switched to Labour by 1922, with a base among the Irish Catholic working-class districts. Women were especially active in building neighbourhood solidarity on housing issues. The Reds operated within the Labour Party with little influence in Parliament, and the mood changed to passive despair by the late 1920s. During the Second World War, Scotland was targeted by Nazi Germany largely due to its factories, shipyards, and coal mines. Cities such as Glasgow and Edinburgh were targeted by German bombers, as were smaller towns mostly located in the central belt of the country. Perhaps the most significant air raid in Scotland was the Clydebank Blitz of March 1941, which intended to destroy naval shipbuilding in the area. 528 people were killed and 4,000 homes totally destroyed. Perhaps Scotland's most unusual wartime episode occurred in 1941 when Rudolf Hess flew to Renfrewshire, possibly intending to broker a peace deal through the Duke of Hamilton. Before his departure from Germany, Hess had given his adjutant, Karl-Heinz Peinz, a letter addressed to Adolf Hitler that detailed his intentions to open peace negotiations with the British. Peinz delivered the letter to Hitler at the Burghof around noon on May 11. Albert Speer later said Hitler described Hess's departure as one of the worst personal blows of his life, as he considered it a personal betrayal. Hitler worried that his allies, Italy and Japan, would perceive Hess's act as an attempt by Hitler to secretly open peace negotiations with the British. After 1945, Scotland's economic situation worsened due to overseas competition, inefficient industry, and industrial disputes. Only in recent decades has the country enjoyed something of a cultural and economic renaissance. Economic factors contributing to this recovery included a resurgent financial services industry, electronics manufacturing, and the North Sea oil and gas industry. The introduction in 1989 by Margaret Thatcher's government of the community charge 1 year before the rest of Great Britain, contributed to a growing movement for Scottish control over domestic affairs. Following a referendum on devolution proposals in 1997, the Scotland Act 1998 was passed by the British Parliament, which established a devolved Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government with responsibility for most laws specific to Scotland. The Scottish Parliament was reconvened in Edinburgh on July 4, 1999. The first to hold the office of First Minister of Scotland was Donald Dewar, who served until his sudden death in 2000. 21st century. The Scottish Parliament building at Holyrood opened in October 2004 after lengthy construction delays and running over budget. The Scottish Parliament's form of proportional representation resulted in no one party having an overall majority for the first 3 Scottish Parliament elections. The pro-independence Scottish National Party led by Alex Salmond achieved an overall majority in the 2011 election, winning 69 of the 129 seats available. The success of the SNP in achieving a majority in the Scottish Parliament paved the way for the September 2014 referendum on Scottish independence. The majority voted against the proposition, with 55% voting no to independence. More powers, particularly concerning taxation, were devolved to the Scottish Parliament after the referendum, following cross-party talks in the Smith Commission. Since the 2014 referendum, events such as the UK leaving the European Union, despite a majority of voters in Scotland voting to remain a member, have led to calls for a second independence referendum. In 2022, the Lord Advocate Dorothy Bain argued the case for the Scottish Government to hold another referendum on the issue, with the Supreme Court later ruling against the argument. Following the Supreme Court decision, the Scottish Government stated that it wished to make amendments to the Scotland Act 1998 that would allow a referendum to be held in 2023. Urbanisation. Although Edinburgh is the capital of Scotland, the largest city is Glasgow, which has just over 584,000 inhabitants. The Greater Glasgow conurbation, with a population of almost 1.2 million, is home to nearly a quarter of Scotland's population. The Central Belt is where most of the main towns and cities of Scotland are located, including Glasgow, Edinburgh, Dundee, and Perth. Scotland's only major city outside the Central Belt is Aberdeen. The Scottish Lowlands host 80% of the total population, where the Central Belt accounts for 3.5 million people. In general, only the more accessible and larger islands remain inhabited. Currently, fewer than 90 remain inhabited. The southern uplands is essentially rural and dominated by agriculture and forestry. Because of housing problems in Glasgow and Edinburgh, 5 new towns were designated between 1947 and 1966. They are East Kilbride, Glenrothes, Cumbernauld, Livingston, and Irvine. The largest council area by population is Glasgow City, with Highland being the largest in terms of geographical area. Languages. Scotland has 3 officially recognised languages: English, Scots, and Scottish Gaelic. Scottish Standard English, a variety of English as spoken in Scotland, is at one end of a bipolar linguistic continuum, with Broad Scots at the other. Scottish Standard English may have been influenced to varying degrees by Scots. The 2011 census indicated that 63% of the population had no skills in Scots. Others speak Highland English. Gaelic is mostly spoken in the Western Isles, where a large proportion of people still speak it. Nationally, its use is confined to 1% of the population. The number of Gaelic speakers in Scotland dropped from 250,000 in 1881 to 60,000 in 2008. Immigration since World War II has given Glasgow, Edinburgh, and Dundee small South Asian communities. In 2011, there were an estimated 49,000 ethnically Pakistani people living in Scotland, making them the largest non-white ethnic group. Since the enlargement of the European Union, more people from Central and Eastern Europe have moved to Scotland, and the 2011 census indicated that 61,000 Poles live there. There are many more people with Scottish ancestry living abroad than the total population of Scotland. In the 2000 census, 9.2 million Americans self-reported some degree of Scottish descent. Ulster's Protestant population is mainly of lowland Scottish descent, and it is estimated that there are more than 27 million descendants of the Scots-Irish migration now living in the US. In Canada, the Scottish-Canadian community accounts for 4.7 million people. About 20% of the original European settler population of New Zealand came from Scotland. Religion. As per the 2022 census, majority of the Scots reported as not following any religion. Rest of the population mostly follows Christianity, mostly Church of Scotland and Catholicism. In almost every council area, majority reported not belonging to a religion except in Alihana and Inverclyde, where Church of Scotland and Catholicism were the most common responses respectively. Forms of Christianity have dominated religious life in what is now Scotland for more than 1,400 years. Since the Scottish Reformation of 1560, the national church has been Protestant in classification and Reformed in theology. Since 1689 it has had a Presbyterian system of church government independent from the state. Its membership dropped just below 300,000 in 2020. The church operates a territorial parish structure, with every community in Scotland having a local congregation. Scotland also has a significant Roman Catholic population with 13.3% professing that faith, particularly in Greater Glasgow and the Northwest. After the Reformation, Roman Catholicism in Scotland continued in the Highlands and some Western Islands like Uist and Barra, and it was strengthened during the 19th century by immigration from Ireland. Other Christian denominations in Scotland include the Free Church of Scotland, and various other Presbyterian offshoots. Scotland's third largest church is the Scottish Episcopal Church. Other minority faith includes Islam, Hinduism, Sikhism, and Buddhism. The Sami Ling Monastery near Eskdale Muir, which celebrated its 40th anniversary in 2007, is the first Buddhist monastery in Western Europe. Government and politics. Scotland is part of the United Kingdom, a constitutional monarchy whose current sovereign is Charles III. The monarchy uses a variety of styles, titles, and other symbols specific to Scotland, most of which originated in the pre-Union Kingdom of Scotland. These include the Royal Standard of Scotland, the Royal Coat of Arms, and the title Duke of Rothesay, which is traditionally given to the heir apparent. There are also distinct Scottish officers of state and officers of the Crown, and the Order of the Thistle, a chivalric order, is specific to the country. The Parliament of the United Kingdom and the Parliament of Scotland are the country's primary legislative bodies. The UK Parliament is sovereign and therefore has supremacy over the Scottish Parliament, but generally restricts itself to legislating over reserved matters, primarily taxes, social security, defence, international relations, and broadcasting. There is a convention: the UK Parliament will not legislate over devolved matters without the Scottish Parliament's consent. Scotland is represented in the House of Commons, the lower chamber of the UK Parliament, by 59 members of Parliament. They are elected to single-member constituencies under the first-past-the-post system of voting. The Scotland Office represents the British government in Scotland and represents Scottish interests within the government. The Scotland Office is led by the Secretary of State for Scotland, who sits in the Cabinet of the United Kingdom. The Conservative MP Alistair Jack has held the position since July 2019. The Scottish Parliament is a unicameral legislature with 129 members. Of them represent individual constituencies and are elected on a first-past-the-post system, and the other 56 are elected in 8 different electoral regions by the additional member system. MSPs normally serve for a 5-year period. The largest party since the 2021 Scottish Parliament election has been the Scottish National Party, which won 64 of the 129 seats. The Scottish Conservatives, Scottish Labour, the Scottish Liberal Democrats and the Scottish Greens also have representation in the current Parliament. The next Scottish Parliament election is due to be held on May 7, 2026. The Scottish Government is led by the First Minister, who is nominated by MSPs and is typically the leader of the largest party in the Parliament. Other ministers are appointed by the First Minister and serve at their discretion. Since May 8, 2024, the First Minister has been John Swinney, the leader of the SNP. Diplomacy and relations. Within the UK, the First Minister is a member of the Heads of Government Council, the body which facilitates intergovernmental relations between the Scottish Government, UK Government, Welsh Government, and Northern Ireland Executive. Foreign policy is a reserved matter and primarily the responsibility of the Foreign Office, a department of the UK Government. Nevertheless, the Scottish Government may promote Scottish interests abroad and encourage foreign investment in Scotland. The First Minister, Cabinet Secretary for Culture, Tourism, and External Affairs, and the Minister for International Development and Europe all have portfolios which include foreign affairs. Scotland's international network consists of 2 Scotland Houses, one in Brussels and the other in London, 7 Scottish Government international offices, and over 30 Scottish Development international offices in other countries globally. Both Scotland Houses are independent Scottish Government establishments, whilst the 7 Scottish Government international offices are based in British embassies or British High Commission offices. The Scottish Government, along with the other devolved governments of the United Kingdom, pay the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office an annual charge to be able to access facilities and support in the embassy or High Commission in which the Scottish international offices are based. The Scottish Government's international network allows Scottish Government ministers to engage with other international governments and bodies in relation to the government's policy objectives as well as that of Scottish businesses. Additionally, the international network of the Scottish Government acts as a mechanism to promote and strengthen the Scottish economy by creating opportunities for Scottish businesses to increase export sales of Scottish products, whilst working with their current, and any future, foreign investors to establish and maintain Scottish jobs in the goods sector. Scotland is a member of the British, Irish Council and the British, Irish Parliamentary Assembly, both of which are intended to foster collaboration between the legislative bodies of the United Kingdom and the Republic of Ireland. The Scottish Government has a network of offices in Beijing, Berlin, Brussels, Copenhagen, Dublin, London, Ottawa, Paris, and Washington, D.C., which promote Scottish interests in their respective areas. The nation has historic ties to France as a result of the Auld Alliance, a treaty signed between the Kingdom of Scotland and Kingdom of France in 1295 to discourage an English invasion of either country. The alliance effectively ended in the 16th century, but the two countries continue to have a close relationship, with a statement of intent being signed in 2013 between the Scottish Government and the Government of France. In 2004 the Scotland-Malawi Partnership was established, which coordinates Scottish activities to strengthen existing links with Malawi, and in 2021, the Scottish Government and Government of Ireland signed the Ireland-Scotland Bilateral Review, committing both governments to increased levels of cooperation on areas such as diplomacy, economy, and business. Scotland also has historical and cultural ties with the Scandinavian countries. Scottish government policy advocates for stronger political relations with the Nordic and Baltic countries, which has resulted in some Nordic-inspired policies being adopted, such as baby boxes. Representatives from the Scottish Parliament attended the Nordic Council for the first time in 2022. Devolution and independence. Devolution, the granting of central government powers to a regional government, gained increasing popularity as a policy in the United Kingdom the late 20th century. It was described by John Smith, then leader of the Labour Party, as the settled will of the Scottish people. The Scottish Parliament and Scottish Government were subsequently established under the Scotland Act 1998. The Act followed a successful referendum in 1997 which found majority support for both creating the Parliament and granting it limited powers to vary income tax. The Act enabled the new institutions to legislate in all areas not explicitly reserved by the UK Parliament. Two more pieces of legislation, the Scotland Acts of 2012 and 2016, gave the Scottish Parliament further powers to legislate on taxation and social security. The 2016 Act also gave the Scottish Government powers to manage the affairs of the Crown Estate in Scotland. Conversely, the United Kingdom Internal Market Act 2020 constrains the Scottish Parliament's autonomy to regulate goods and services, and the academic view is that this undermines devolution. The 2007 Scottish Parliament elections led to the Scottish National Party, which supports Scottish independence, forming a minority government. The new government established a national conversation on constitutional issues, proposing a number of options such as increasing the powers of the Scottish Parliament, federalism, or a referendum on Scottish independence from the United Kingdom. The three main unionist opposition parties, Scottish Labour, the Scottish Conservatives, and the Scottish Liberal Democrats, created a separate commission to investigate the distribution of powers between devolved Scottish and UK-wide bodies while not considering independence. In August 2009 the SNP proposed a bill to hold a referendum on independence in November 2010, but was defeated by opposition from all other major parties. The 2011 Scottish Parliament election resulted in an SNP overall majority in the Scottish Parliament, and on September 18, 2014 a referendum on Scottish independence was held. The referendum resulted in a rejection of independence, by 55.3% to 44.7%. During the campaign, the three main parties in the British Parliament, the Conservatives, Labour, and the Liberal Democrats, pledged to extend the powers of the Scottish Parliament. An all-party commission chaired by Robert Smith, Baron Smith of Kelvin, was formed, which led to the Scotland Act 2016. Following the European Union Referendum Act 2015, the 2016 United Kingdom European Union membership referendum was held on June 23, 2016 on Britain's membership of the European Union. A majority in the United Kingdom voted to withdraw from the EU, while a majority within Scotland voted to remain a member. The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, announced the following day that as a result a new independence referendum was highly likely. On January 31, 2020, the United Kingdom formally withdrew from the European Union. Because constitutional affairs are reserved matters under the Scotland Act, the Scottish Parliament would again have to be granted temporary additional powers under Section 30 to hold a legally binding vote. Local government. For local government purposes, Scotland is subdivided into 32 single-tier council areas. The areas were established in 1996, and their councils are responsible for the provision of all local government services. Decisions are made by councillors, who are elected at local elections every 5 years. The leader of the council is typically a councillor from the party with the most seats. Councils also have a civic head, typically called the Provost or Lord Provost, who represents the council on ceremonial occasions and chairs council meetings. Community councils are informal organizations that represent smaller subdivisions within each council area. Police Scotland and the Scottish Fire and Rescue Service cover the entire country. For healthcare and postal districts, and a number of other governmental and non-governmental organizations such as the churches, there are other long-standing methods of subdividing Scotland for the purposes of administration. Economy. Scotland has a Western-style open mixed economy closely linked with the rest of the UK and the wider world. Scotland is one of the leading financial centres in Europe, and is the largest financial centre in the United Kingdom outside of London. Edinburgh is the financial services centre of Scotland, with many large finance firms based there, including Lloyds Banking Group, the Bank of Scotland, the government-owned Royal Bank of Scotland and Standard Life. Edinburgh was ranked 15th in the list of world financial centres in 2007, but fell to 37th in 2012, following damage to its reputation, and in 2016 was ranked 56th out of 86. Its status had returned to 17th by 2020. Traditionally, the Scottish economy was dominated by heavy industry underpinned by shipbuilding in Glasgow, coal mining, and steel industries. Petroleum-related industries associated with the extraction of North Sea oil have also been important employers from the 1970s, especially in the northeast of Scotland. Deindustrialisation during the 1970s and 1980s saw a shift from a manufacturing focus towards a more service-oriented economy. The Scottish National Investment Bank was established by the Scottish Government in 2020, which uses public money to fund commercial projects across Scotland with the hope that the seed capital will encourage further private investment, to help develop a fairer, more sustainable economy. £2 billion of taxpayers' money was earmarked for the bank. In 2022, Scotland's gross domestic product, including offshore oil and gas, was estimated at £211.7 billion. In 2021, Scottish exports in goods and services excluding intra-UK trade were estimated to be £50.1 billion. Scotland's primary goods exports are mineral fuels, machinery and transport, and beverages, and tobacco. The country's largest export markets in goods are the European Union, Asia and Oceania, and North America. Whisky is one of Scotland's more known goods of economic activity. Exports increased by 87% in the decade to 2012 and were valued at £4.3 billion in 2013, which was 85% of Scotland's food and drink exports. It supports around 10,000 jobs directly and 25,000 indirectly. It may contribute £500 million to Scotland, rather than several billion pounds, as more than 80% of whisky produced is owned by non-Scottish companies. A briefing published in 2002 by the Scottish Parliament Information Centre for the Scottish Parliament's Enterprise and Lifelong Learning Committee stated that tourism accounted for up to 5% of GDP and 7.5% of employment. Scotland was one of the industrial powerhouses of Europe from the time of the Industrial Revolution onwards, being a world leader in manufacturing. This left a legacy in the diversity of goods and services which Scotland produces, from textiles, whisky and shortbread to jet engines, buses, computer software, investment management, and other related financial services. In common with most other advanced industrialized economies, Scotland has seen a decline in the importance of both manufacturing industries and primary-based extractive industries. This has been combined with the rise in the service sector of the economy, which has grown to be the largest sector in Scotland.